You think you know what you're asking when you ask, why do magnets repel? You don't. And until you understand why your question itself is broken, every answer will feel unsatisfying, no matter how smart it sounds, no matter who gives it to you. Pick up two magnets, North Pole to North Pole. Feel that push, that resistance in what looks like empty air. You want a reason, a story, something familiar. You want me to say magnets repel for the same reason springs push back, or rubber stretches, or two hands press against each other. But here's the problem. There is no familiar thing. And I'm not being difficult. I'm not hiding behind complexity. I'm telling you the truth most people avoid. Magnetic repulsion is not caused by something simpler. It is the simple thing. It's fundamental. You're asking me to explain electromagnetism by comparing it to something more basic. But there is nothing more basic. That's like asking me to explain numbers using something simpler than numbers. It can't be done. Now you might say, wait, I've heard explanations. Magnetic fields, electron spin. No, those aren't explanations. They're descriptions. They tell you how the force behaves, not why it exists. And if you don't understand that distinction, this entire discussion collapses before it even begins. Let me show you why. Push your hand down on a desk. Go ahead. Push hard. Why doesn't your hand go through? You'll probably say, because the desk is solid. That sounds like an answer, but it isn't. It's just a label. Try again. Maybe you'll say, because the atoms are packed together. Better. But here's the uncomfortable truth. Atoms are not solid. An atom is almost entirely empty space. If you scaled an atom up to the size of a football stadium, the nucleus would be a tiny speck at the center. The electrons would be microscopic dots far out near the seats. Everything in between is empty. Your hand is mostly empty space. The desk is mostly empty space. So why don't they pass through each other? This is where your intuition breaks. The answer is electromagnetic repulsion. The electrons in your hand and the electrons in the desk have the same charge. Like charges repel. That force, trillions of tiny interactions added together, is what you experience as solidity. And here's the part that should stop you. The force stopping your hand is the same force that makes magnets push apart. Not similar, not related, identical. If that makes you uncomfortable, good. Because now you're finally asking the right kind of question. At this point, most explanations panic. They introduce a word that sounds like an answer. Field. They say magnets repel because of magnetic fields. Electrons repel because of electric fields. And people nod, satisfied. But you shouldn't be, because a field is not a cause. It's a bookkeeping tool. A field is how physicists describe where a force would act if something were placed there. That's it. It's a map, not the terrain. Saying magnets repel because of magnetic fields is like saying cities exist because of maps. The map doesn't create the city. It only describes it. So the question comes back stronger than before. What creates the field? And now physics has no choice but to get honest. There is no mechanical medium, no invisible fluid, no tiny gears pushing things apart. Magnetic repulsion is not contact. It is not pressure. It is not collision. It is interaction at a distance. And that fact alone terrified early scientists. Isaac Newton hated this idea. He believed gravity acting across empty space without contact was absurd. Action at a distance, he called it. Something mystical, something unfinished. He was right. But not in the way he thought. Because electromagnetism doesn't push objects apart through space, it shapes space. When charged particles exist, the geometry around them changes. The rules of motion change. Objects moving through that region respond differently, not because something hits them, but because the allowed paths are different. This is hard to visualize because our brains evolved for rocks and sticks, not fields and space-time. But the math is clear. Charged particles alter the structure of the electromagnetic field. That field determines how other charges are allowed to move. What we experience as repulsion is simply particles following the only paths available to them. No push, no shove, no invisible hand, just rules. And here's where magnets quietly reveal something profound. A magnet doesn't just have north and south poles, it has an internal order. Inside the magnet, countless electrons have their spins aligned, not randomly, not chaotically, ordered. That alignment creates a macroscopic effect, a structured field that extends outward into space. When two magnets approach, their internal orders either cooperate or clash. If the configurations cannot coexist, the system moves toward a lower energy state. That movement is repulsion, not because magnets want to push away, but because the universe always prefers simpler, more stable arrangements. This is not intention. It is inevitability. And once you see that, another unsettling realization appears. Magnetic repulsion is not a force added to nature. It is what nature does by default. Now we reach the point where most explanations quietly fall apart. Because if magnets don't push, if fields don't push, if nothing is colliding, then why do objects move at all? The answer is subtle, and once you see it, you can't unsee it. Energy does not cause motion. Energy restricts motion. This sounds backwards, but it's fundamental. In physics, systems don't move because something forces them to. They move because certain states are forbidden. Every physical system exists on an energy landscape, a kind of invisible terrain with valleys, slopes, and ridges. Low energy states are valleys. High energy states are peaks. A system will always evolve toward configurations that reduce total energy, not because it wants to, but because no other paths are stable. When two magnets repel, the configuration where they are close together corresponds to a higher energy state. That arrangement is unstable, so the system moves, not because something pushes it away, but because staying there is not allowed. Motion is escape. This principle appears everywhere. A ball rolls downhill not because gravity pulls it, but because being higher up is energetically disfavored. The force is just how we describe the slope. Magnets behave the same way. When opposing magnetic fields overlap, the energy density of space between them increases. The universe responds by minimizing that energy, reshaping the configuration until stability is restored. Repulsion is simply the system sliding off an energetic cliff. And here's the deeper truth. What we call force is a shortcut, a human-friendly summary of something far more abstract. At the deepest level, physics doesn't talk about pushes. It talks about constraints, allowed states, forbidden states, stable configurations. Everything else is storytelling. This idea became unavoidable in quantum mechanics. In the quantum world, particles don't have definite positions or trajectories. They have probability distributions, wave functions. These wave functions don't evolve because of forces. They evolve because of rules encoded in equations. The Schrödinger equation doesn't say what pushes a particle. It says which states are possible and which are not. Motion emerges as probabilities rearrange themselves. And when you combine quantum mechanics with electromagnetism, something shocking appears. There is no fundamental repulsive force between electrons. Their wave functions simply cannot occupy the same state. This is the Pauli exclusion principle. Electrons repel not because they push each other away, but because the universe forbids them from being identical in the same place. The force is the consequence of impossibility. And now the picture changes completely. Magnetic repulsion, electric repulsion, even the solidity of matter. They are not caused by contact. They are caused by rules. The universe does not push things apart. It prevents them from collapsing into forbidden states. By now, something should feel wrong. If motion is escape, if forces are constraints, if repulsion is prohibition, then this question becomes unavoidable. Is anything actually touching anything at all? The answer is disturbing. No, not ever. Not even once. When you place your hand on a table, there is no moment where your atoms contact the atoms of the table. There is no collision, no microscopic impact, no solid surface meeting another solid surface. What happens instead is this. As your hand approaches the table, the electron clouds of your atoms begin to overlap with the electron clouds of the table. The electromagnetic field responds instantly. Certain quantum states become forbidden. Energy skyrockets if the overlap increases. The system reacts by reconfiguring. Your hand stops, not because it hit something, but because going further is not allowed. The sensation you interpret as touch is not contact. It is resistance to forbidden overlap. It is the universe enforcing its rules. Pressure is not compression of matter. It is compression of possibility. This is why matter appears solid, even though it is almost entirely empty space. Solidity is not about density. It is about constraint. The emptier the atom, the more room there is for electron wave functions to overlap, and the stronger the prohibition becomes. Now look back at magnets. When two north poles face each other, nothing is colliding, nothing is pushing. No invisible rods or springs are compressed. The magnetic fields rearrange the energy landscape of space itself. Regions between the magnets become energetically hostile. Certain field configurations become unstable. The system responds by separating. Exactly the same process that stops your hand at the table stops two magnets from touching. Scale is the only difference, and this leads to a deeply uncomfortable realization. Contact is a lie your brain tells you. Your nervous system evolved to survive in a macroscopic world. It compresses trillions of quantum interactions into a single word, because that's efficient. Touch, push, hit, press. These are not fundamental events, they are interpretations. Your brain receives electromagnetic signals from nerve endings, electrons rearranging inside neurons, and constructs the experience of contact. You never experience reality directly. You experience a translation, and magnets break that translation. They expose the gap. With solids, the distance where repulsion occurs is too small to notice. With magnets, the distance is visible, and your brain panics, because something is happening where your intuition says nothing should happen. But the physics has been doing this the entire time. Every step you take, every object you sit on, every wall that stops you, is electromagnetic repulsion acting across empty space. Magnets aren't strange. They're honest. They reveal what reality has always been. Nothing is touching anything. The universe is not built from contact. It is built from rules that decide how close things are allowed to be. At this point, most people feel a kind of frustration because everything sounds precise. Everything sounds consistent. And yet something feels unfinished. You still want to ask, but why do these rules exist at all? Why does electromagnetic repulsion happen? Why are certain overlaps forbidden? Why does the universe enforce these constraints instead of different ones? And here is where physics does something most people are not prepared for. It stops. Not because scientists are lazy, not because we haven't looked hard enough, but because the question itself has reached the bottom. This is the part nobody tells you. Physics does not explain reality the way stories do. It does not move endlessly from cause to cause to cause. It moves downward until it hits bedrock. An electromagnetic force is bedrock. When you ask why at this level, you are no longer asking a scientific question. You are asking for psychological comfort. You want the unfamiliar to be reduced to something familiar. You want the universe to justify itself in terms you already understand. But nothing underneath electromagnetism exists to compare it to. It is not caused by springs. It is not explained by pressure. It is not derived from contact or collision. It simply is. This is what fundamental actually means. Not mysterious, not magical, but irreducible. We can describe how the force behaves. We can calculate it with absurd precision. We can predict outcomes to 11 decimal places. We can build motors, computers, MRI machines, particle accelerators. But we cannot explain electromagnetism using something more basic, because there is nothing more basic. This is not a failure of physics. It is a limit of explanation. Every wide chain ends somewhere. Why does ice float? Density. Why density? Molecular structure. Why structure? Electron behavior. Why electrons behave that way? Quantum equations. Why those equations? Because they match reality. And there, the chain stops. There is no deeper because. Only measurement. Only pattern. Only mathematical consistency. This is deeply uncomfortable because it violates how human intuition works. Your brain evolved to navigate forests, not fundamental forces. It expects reasons to feel like stories, beginnings, causes, motives. But the universe does not operate on narrative. It operates on rules. And rules do not explain themselves. They define what is allowed. Magnets repel because the electromagnetic field does not permit certain configurations. Not because something pushes, not because something wants space, but because lower energy states exist elsewhere. That's it. No motive, no intention, no hidden mechanism underneath. Once you understand this, something changes. The mystery doesn't disappear, but it relocates. The question is no longer, why do magnets repel? The real question becomes, why does the universe have rules at all? And that question does not belong to physics. That question belongs to something deeper. Once you truly understand this, magnets stop being special. They stop being the weird exception in a normal world, and you realize something far more unsettling. Everything you touch is doing the same thing. Your hand is not pressing against the desk. Your feet are not resting on the floor. Your body is not sitting on a chair. At no point do atoms actually touch. What you experience as solid is nothing more than trillions upon trillions of electromagnetic repulsions, stacked so tightly together that your brain interprets them as contact. You are floating on force. The same force that makes two north poles push apart is the force holding your body together right now. The same force stopping you from falling through the floor is the force powering chemistry, biology, technology, and life itself. Magnets do not behave strangely. They behave honestly. They expose what reality is actually made of. And here's the part that most people miss. The mystery you feel when magnets repel through empty space is not a mystery in physics. It is a mismatch between reality and human intuition. You are comfortable with electromagnetic repulsion at atomic distances because you have experienced it since infancy. Your brain grew around it. It became invisible to you. But stretch that same interaction to a visible gap, a centimeter of air, and suddenly it feels wrong. Not because the physics changed, but because your expectations did. Nothing is touching. Nothing ever was. We only call it contact when the distance becomes too small to see. This is why asking why do magnets repel feels unsatisfying. You are asking for a story where none exists. You are asking nature to explain itself in terms it never agreed to use. Physics does not offer comfort. It offers consistency. It does not tell you why the universe exists. It tells you how it behaves. And by that standard, electromagnetism is one of the greatest successes in human history. We can calculate magnetic forces, predict their strength, manipulate them, shape them, harness them. From electric motors to brain signals, from chemical bonds to computer chips, from light itself to the atoms in your body. One force, one set of equations, everywhere. That is not a failure to explain. That is unification. The universe is not a collection of unrelated mysteries. It is a small number of rules repeating themselves in unimaginably complex ways. And magnets give you a rare glimpse of that structure. Raw, exposed, impossible to ignore. So the next time you feel that invisible push between two magnets, don't ask why. Ask something better. Ask how strong it is, how far it reaches, how it scales, how it can be used. Because the moment you stop demanding comfort and start demanding understanding, the universe opens itself to you, not as a story, not as an analogy, but as it truly is, mathematical, consistent, and profoundly beautiful.